Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Wisdom Post Stories. My heart fills with joy as we gather again in this sacred space of storytelling and connection. With deep gratitude, I pray, Almighty Father, thank you for uniting souls across oceans and mountains. Protect each family member watching today. Grant them vibrant health, unshakable joy, and illuminate our paths through stories that heal, transform, and unite. Amen. Why are you sleeping here on the sofa? Come to bed. My dear family, I'm curious, where in this beautiful world are you watching from today? Are you joining from America's open landscapes, Britain's historic shores, South Africa's majestic terrain, Canada's serene wilderness, Australia's golden lands, or perhaps from the vibrant islands of the Caribbean? Share your location and presence in the comments below. Did our recent stories touch your heart? Your voice is our greatest gift. Let's feel the strength of our united family. Remember, your presence here is essential. Without you, our family remains incomplete. With boundless love, let's begin today's new story. Hania's soft voice pierced the silence as she gently grasped Rayan's hand, tugging him lightly. Rayan, who was sprawled on the couch with his eyes closed, jolted awake in shock, quickly sitting upright as his heart began to race wildly. "What are you doing, Hania?" His voice cracked in startled confusion, a note of panic trembling through his tone. He hadn't expected Hania to approach him so boldly, to casually take his hand without hesitation. "Why are you acting like this?" she replied innocently, her voice laced with bewildered hurt. "I'm your wife, Rayan. If you sleep out here on the sofa, how will we sleep together? I can't fit here with you. The sofa's too small." Her delicate features were illuminated by the soft glow of the bedside lamp, and her wide doe-like eyes blinked with confusion, innocence radiating from her young, delicate face. Rayan stared at her, his eyes filled with disbelief as he observed her from head to toe. It was difficult for him to comprehend the stark innocence and childlike sincerity radiating from this 14-year-old girl standing before him, earnestly trying to fulfill the role she'd been told was hers. "What kind of nonsense is this, Hania?" he finally spoke, his voice a strained whisper. "Why would you sleep with me? Go, lie down comfortably on the bed. I've left it empty just for you." Hania shook her head adamantly, her dark hair cascading gently around her slender shoulders. "No, Rayan. Bajo said clearly, I'm your wife, and from now on, I must stay with you. Married couples always sleep together, right? Then why are you sleeping here?" Her fingers tightened around his wrist again, gently urging him upward. He exhaled deeply, pressing his fingers to his temples, trying to hold on to the slipping threads of his patience. "Is that all your sister has taught you? Did she not bother to tell you anything else?" Anger suddenly flared through his voice, sharper than he'd intended. He immediately regretted it, but his frustration with the entire bizarre situation was becoming difficult to contain. "She taught me plenty," Hania replied earnestly, entirely oblivious to Rayan's simmering irritation. "She said that I should always keep you happy, take care of you, get dressed beautifully for you. She even gave me a special dress to wear for you. Do you want to see it?" Her voice surged with enthusiasm as she turned and moved eagerly toward the wardrobe. Rayan felt his breathing halt. Frustration and anger coiled tighter inside him, aimed fiercely at Shanze, Hania's older sister, who had clearly filled this innocent girl's mind with ridiculous notions. He cursed silently, wondering how far this absurdity would go. Moments later, Hania returned, her delicate hands clutching something silky and purple. She lifted it up, allowing the elegant garment to cascade down her hands, a soft, shimmering purple silk nightgown that shimmered faintly in the dim lighting of the room. "Look, Bajo gave me this. She said I'd look pretty for you in it. Isn't it beautiful?" Her innocent eyes were bright with excitement, completely unaware of the storm brewing within Rayan. With a sharp, frustrated motion, Rayan grabbed the silky garment from her grasp, wrapping it roughly in his hands and tossing it aside. "Stop blindly following every word your sister says," he snapped harshly. "Go to bed right now." Stung by his words, tears welled up instantly in Hania's eyes. Her innocent expression crumbled into hurt confusion as her small voice wavered. "Why are you being so mean, Rayan? Don't you care about me? I'm your wife. Don't you love me at all?" That was the breaking point for Rayan. Clenching his fists in a fierce attempt to suppress his mounting irritation, he stood up abruptly, towering over her small frame. "Do you even know what love means, Hania?" He asked coldly, deliberately, his voice low and edged with bitterness. "Of course I do," she whispered hesitantly, though clearly unsure. "It means you'll praise me, give me gifts, and then we'll sleep together." Her eyes were round with sincerity, utterly unaware of the complexity hidden behind Rayan's question. "Really?" Rayan's voice dropped further, dangerously quiet. He moved a step closer, closing the space between them, his eyes intense and penetrating. "And after that?" Hania blinked, confusion clouding her gaze. "After that?" she echoed softly, clearly puzzled. "We just sleep, right?" A dark, cynical smile curved Rayan's lips. Slowly, deliberately, he placed his hand on her shoulder, applying slight pressure. Startled, she drew back instinctively, suddenly wary. "Tell me, Hania," he murmured, his voice heavy with sarcasm. "What comes after that? Do you even know?" She drew back hastily, alarmed by his sudden change of demeanor. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, and a nervous tremble rippled through her small frame. Rayan saw her distress and softened slightly, allowing a sardonic smile to creep onto his face. Leaning in, he whispered slowly, deliberately, "Now, go sleep quietly and stop pestering me, or else I might just show you exactly what really happens on a wedding night." Hania hurriedly stepped back, heart pounding, quickly retreating to the bed. Pulling the blanket over her small frame, she glanced back at him briefly. Rayan stood near the sofa, arms crossed defiantly, still watching her intently with an unreadable expression. A strange shiver raced down Hania's spine, unsettling her deeply. Lying down, she tugged the blanket tightly around herself, closing her eyes to block out the confusion swirling in her mind. Her sister's advice echoed clearly. Stay close to your husband, win his heart, make him yours. But right now, Rayan's cold behavior had thrown her into a state of anxious uncertainty. She didn't understand why her innocent attempt at closeness had resulted in such a fierce rejection. As she drifted uneasily into sleep, Hania wondered fretfully if her sister had perhaps missed telling her something very important after all. "Now I'll have to ask Bajo what to do next," Hania whispered softly to herself, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Within moments, exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep, unaware of the turmoil consuming the man she had just married. Rayan sat on the edge of the small, uncomfortable sofa, observing the quiet rise and fall of the blanket covering the girl, just 14, innocent, fragile, who had suddenly become his wife. A mixture of confusion, disbelief, and guilt gripped him as he tried to comprehend the turn his life had suddenly taken. He had never imagined himself bound in marriage so abruptly, especially with someone who seemed like a mere child compared to him. Hania was 10 years younger, still lost in the world of innocent childhood fantasies, clearly influenced by her older sister, Shenze. Rayan knew Hania had always relied heavily on Shenze's guidance, absorbing every word as unquestioned truth. Tonight, he had seen clearly how deeply that influence ran, manifesting in her innocent attempts to fulfill a role she scarcely understood. Rayan sank deeper into his thoughts, leaning his head against the sofa's hard backrest. He drew a deep breath, frustration and despair tightening around his chest. He realized painfully how difficult it was going to be to explain the complexities of marital life to someone as innocent as Hania. How could he make her understand what marriage really meant when she could barely grasp the basic nature of their relationship? The more he thought about the years that lay ahead, the more restless and agitated he felt. He resolved firmly that he would speak to his mother about separating their rooms. It was imperative to establish clear boundaries. This marriage, at least emotionally, was something Rayan had yet to accept, and he certainly had no plans to initiate a marital relationship anytime soon. His decision gave him some momentary relief, allowing him to finally curl up awkwardly on the cramped sofa and fall into a restless sleep. But morning came quickly, cruelly, shattering his temporary solace with harsh reality. Loud banging echoed through the room, pulling Rayan abruptly out of sleep. He stumbled towards the door, groggy and irritated, to find Shanze standing impatiently, her eyes narrowing slightly as she glanced inside. "Hania, aren't you up yet?" How long do you plan to sleep? Come on, get ready. Shanze stepped briskly inside, shaking Hania awake with a practiced authority that made Rayan frown in silent frustration. Hania opened her eyes slowly, rubbing them with her small hands before suddenly bursting into tears and clutching her sister tightly. Shanze's surprise was evident. She glanced questioningly at Rayan, who stood frozen, utterly bewildered by this unexpected morning drama. Through her sobs, Hania's innocent, childish voice spilled forth in distress. Bajo, you said I had to sleep with Rayan, but he didn't even leave room for me on the sofa. He refused to come to bed too. And Bajo, you know what else? He didn't even give me a wedding gift. Rayan's face flushed a deep crimson, embarrassment flooding every nerve. Shanze, struggling to hold back her laughter at the absurdity of the situation, gently began calming Hania, softly explaining things to her, as if comforting a small child who'd misunderstood simple instructions. Unable to bear the humiliation another second, Rayan stormed out of the room, anger simmering beneath his skin. At that moment, he would have given anything to silence Hania, whose innocent, naive disclosures had made a mockery of his dignity. But a pang of guilt quickly replaced his anger. After all, it wasn't entirely her fault. She was merely a child, simply following instructions she barely understood, repeating words whose implications were utterly foreign to her. Driven by the need to escape his growing frustration, Rayan hurried toward his mother's room, where she sat calmly, engrossed in her phone. He entered briskly, exhaling deeply, and collapsed dramatically beside her. Mom, what have you gotten me into? His voice was heavy with frustration, a desperate plea for understanding woven through his words. Laying his head on his mother's lap, he closed his eyes, feeling instant comfort from her gentle presence, like a shield from all the chaos he'd experienced in the past 24 hours. His mother tenderly stroked his hair, her tone gentle yet firm. Rayan, don't speak like that. Hania is such a sweet girl. She's young, I know, but give her some time. She'll understand things better. You know how pure-hearted she is. Rayan sat up slightly, frustration still evident in his expression. Unable to stop himself, words tumbled bitterly from his lips. Oh yes, so pure-hearted that she openly tells Shanze every detail of our private conversations. Immediately regretting his outburst, he bit his lip, recognizing too late the impact of what he had said. His mother stared at him, silent for a moment, processing his statement before offering a comforting smile. Rayan, don't worry about these things. Shanze will handle her. You just take care of Hania. Remember, she's grieving deeply. She just lost her father, not even 20 days ago. Her pain is enormous. If Shanze weren't already married, I would have chosen her for you instead. But now it's Hania. Be patient with her. Rayan sighed deeply, the weight of responsibility suddenly heavier than ever. Fine, Mom. I've married her as you asked. But please, at least arrange separate rooms for us. I can't handle this. His mother looked at him thoughtfully. Understanding reflected clearly in her eyes. All right, I'll arrange it, but promise me you'll be gentle with her feelings. Rayan nodded silently, conflicted emotions battling fiercely within him. Outside the window, daylight seeped through the curtains, revealing clearly the unexpected path life had taken. A path filled with uncertainty, innocence, misunderstandings, and perhaps a glimpse of something deeper hidden behind the innocence of Hania's eyes. As Rayan sat quietly, pondering the road ahead, one thought echoed persistently in his mind. How could he ever reconcile himself to a marriage he had neither sought nor desired? Now I'll have to ask Bajo what I'm supposed to do next, Hania murmured softly, feeling overwhelmed as she pulled the covers closer to herself. Sleep quickly wrapped around her like a comforting cocoon, pulling her away from her anxious thoughts. Rayan, however, was far from peaceful. He remained on the small sofa, watching her silently beneath the dim glow of the bedside lamp. Wrapped completely in the blanket, she looked impossibly small, fragile, a mere child. At only 14 years old, she'd suddenly become his wife, and the reality was something he found nearly impossible to digest. She wasn't just younger, she was still a child at heart, steeped deeply in innocence. Her elder sister, Shanze, had practically raised her, always guiding her, making decisions for her. Even now, Hania obediently parroted Shanze's instructions without truly understanding their meaning. Rayan's heart sank heavily. How could he possibly explain the intricacies of marriage to someone whose innocence bordered on naivety? Leaning his head against the sofa's hard edge, Rayan closed his eyes, feeling suffocated. Life had taken an unexpected, cruel turn. He'd never even imagined marrying a girl 10 years younger, a girl who was little more than a child. The uncertainty of their future terrified him. How would they manage? How could he live normally with this innocent, oblivious young girl whose very presence filled him with unease? Resolved, Rayan decided he'd speak clearly to his mother. They needed separate rooms. He couldn't accept this sudden marriage yet, nor did he intend to start marital life with Hania. Thinking about this eased his heart slightly, allowing him to finally drift into a restless, uncomfortable sleep on the tiny sofa. The morning, however, brought a fresh wave of trouble. Rayan awoke abruptly to loud knocking, his heart thudding rapidly. He swung open the door to see Shanze standing impatiently. "Wake up, Hania. How long will you sleep? We've got to get you ready." Shanze's voice, sharp as always, jolted Hania awake. Slowly, she opened her eyes, blinking groggily until reality sank in, and immediately burst into tears, clinging desperately to her sister. "Bajo!" she cried helplessly, burying her face against Shanze's shoulder. Rayan stared, completely stunned by the sudden emotional scene unfolding before him. "What happened, Hania?" Shanze asked, confusion clear in her eyes. But before Rayan could respond, Hania blurted out her grievances, words tumbling from her mouth unchecked, revealing every private detail of last night. "Bajo, you told me to stay close to Rayan. You said to win his heart, sleep with him, and control him. But he didn't even sleep on the bed. And you know what else? He didn't even give me a wedding gift." Rayan's cheeks burned fiercely with embarrassment. He felt a wave of humiliation sweep through him as Shanze struggled to suppress a laugh. She gently soothed Hania, comforting her with soft whispers, leaving Rayan to retreat helplessly into himself, drowning in humiliation and anger. For a moment, he wished he could vanish. Anger flared dangerously inside him. Hania had unintentionally embarrassed him deeply, exposing him openly in front of Shanze. But he couldn't blame her. Not entirely. Hania was innocent, a naive victim caught between misguided instructions and genuine childlike innocence. Burning with frustration, Rayan immediately left the room, heading straight for his mother's quarters. He found her calmly sipping tea, oblivious to the turmoil raging within him. "Mama, I can't do this," he groaned as he sank down beside her, placing his head gently in her comforting lap. "I can't bear this disaster anymore. I need to separate rooms immediately." His mother's eyes softened with understanding as she gently stroked his hair, comforting him in silence for a moment. "Don't say that, Rayan. Hania is a sweet, innocent child. Just give her time. She's very young, yes, but she has a pure heart." Rayan sighed deeply, his voice edged with bitterness. "Pure heart? So pure that she humiliates me in front of her sister? Mama, you don't know what happened this morning." She practically announced to Shanze every awkward detail of last night. His mother paused, absorbing his words carefully, before replying in a measured, gentle tone. "Son, she's young and inexperienced. Shanze will handle her. You just focus on taking care of her. She lost her father less than 20 days ago. The poor girl is grieving deeply. If Shanze wasn't already married, I'd have kept Hania with her." Rayan's frustration gradually softened. His mother's words touched something deeper inside him, stirring guilt. "All right, Mama, but please arrange separate rooms for us. I can't handle this." "Don't worry," she smiled gently, patting his shoulder. "This house has enough space. I'll arrange a separate room for Hania." Later that evening, his mother kept her word, swiftly shifting Hania's belongings into another room. Rayan felt relief wash over him. Finally, he could breathe easily again. But his peace didn't last long. Hania was devastated upon learning of their separation. She ran straight to Rayan's room, her face streaked with tears, confusion flickering across her eyes. "Why are we in separate rooms now, Rayan?" she asked, voice trembling. "I thought married couples always share a room?" Rayan sighed heavily, gently but firmly addressing her misunderstanding. Hania, listen carefully. This is my room. I don't share it with anyone. I couldn't even sleep last night on that sofa. But who asked you to sleep on the sofa? She challenged innocently. I asked you to sleep in the bed with me. Rayan bit back a sharp retort, taking a deep breath. Listen, Hania, I'm not used to sharing my personal space. I couldn't sleep all night. It's better this way, trust me. But, she began again before he harshly interrupted her, his patience breaking. No buts, Hania. Now please don't come into my room again without knocking first. He shut the door gently but firmly, his pulse racing, anxiety tightening his chest. Collapsing onto the bed, he buried his face in his hands, feeling trapped. This was only one part of his mounting worries. Soon his university friends, particularly Ruqayya, would inevitably find out. Ruqayya had long harbored feelings for him, expressing her interest openly. He'd always kept his distance, determined to focus on his studies first. Now everything was crashing down around him. How would he explain this unexpected marriage, this forced relationship, to anyone? And as if fate were mocking him, the very next day brought the confrontation he dreaded. Ruqayya cornered him in the university corridor, eyes blazing with fury and betrayal. What's this I hear, Rayan married? Really? Weren't you the one always telling me to wait, to focus on our studies first? She paused, eyes narrowing angrily. So who is she? Show me her picture. I want to see who managed to do what I couldn't. Listen, Ruqayya, Rayan began carefully, trying to soothe her raging fury. It's not like that. You've misunderstood. I married Hania because her father, Uncle Sharafat, passed away suddenly. You know how close he was to my father. I had no choice. Ruqayya stepped back, her eyes flashing dangerously with anger and betrayal, and Rayan realized with sudden dread that his troubles were only just beginning. Rayan grimaced, staring at his mother with growing impatience. Mom, honestly, I can't manage life with this little nuisance. Right now, I have to focus entirely on establishing my business. If she keeps hovering around me, constantly asking childish questions, I'll never achieve anything. His mother sighed softly, gently placing her hand on Rayan's shoulder. She offered a comforting smile. You're right, son. I've been thinking exactly the same thing. I'll arrange separate rooms for you two. I also want Hania to prioritize her studies for now. People already know you're married, so we won't have to worry about their gossip or judgment. My only concern was that I couldn't keep a young girl at home unmarried after her father's death. Rayan breathed deeply, relief evident in his expression. At least now he wouldn't have to share his personal space with Hania. The marriage had been sudden and unexpected, driven entirely by tragedy rather than affection. Hania's father, Uncle Sharafat, had been Rayan's father's closest friend, almost like family. His sudden passing had shattered Hania's life and left her vulnerable. With no one else to take her in, their union seemed the only practical option. Yet this arrangement still felt profoundly unnatural to Rayan. Later that evening, Rayan's mother rearranged the household, designating separate rooms for Rayan and Hania. Their sprawling house had plenty of space, with 6 spacious rooms, so giving Hania her own private space was not challenging. But the news was devastating for Hania. When she learned they'd no longer be sharing a room, she raced into Rayan's room, eyes brimming with tears. Rayan, she cried, distress filling her innocent eyes. Why aren't we sharing a room anymore? I thought married couples always stay together. I can't understand why you're pushing me away. Rayan, feeling weary, tried to reason with her gently. Hania, please try to understand. This is my room and I'm not accustomed to sharing my space with anyone. Last night I couldn't sleep comfortably on the sofa either. But you didn't have to sleep on the sofa, she replied stubbornly, her eyes filled with childlike confusion and hurt. I never asked you to sleep there, Rayan sighed deeply, losing his patience. Enough, Hania. Just accept that we're not sharing rooms. And please, don't enter without knocking any more. He shut the door firmly, sinking onto his bed with a frustrated sigh. Anxiety gripped his chest, thinking about what would happen if his friends at the university, especially Ruqayya, found out about his sudden marriage. Ruqayya had always openly expressed her feelings toward him, repeatedly trying to bridge the gap between friendship and something deeper. But Rayan had consistently distanced himself, determined to prioritize his education and career first. Yet now fate had forced him into a marriage, complicating everything. His fears soon materialized the very next day. He barely reached university when Ruqayya confronted him aggressively, her eyes blazing with hurt and fury. "How dare you, Rayan? For 2 years you've pushed me away, asking me to wait until you settle your career. But suddenly you go off and marry someone else? Who is she? Show me a picture right now." "Listen, Ruqayya, please." Rayan tried to calm her softly, sensing a scene brewing in front of his curious classmates. But Ruqayya was relentless. "What's left to listen to, Rayan? You've betrayed me. Is this your idea of compassion? Marrying a minor because she needed support? If you're running a charity home, take me as well. I also need emotional support." Her words were sharp, mocking, dripping with sarcasm. Before Rayan could form a reply, she threw another accusation. "You're a hypocrite. All that talk about being career-oriented was just empty lies, wasn't it?" "Ruqayya, it's not like that," Rayan began carefully, attempting to explain. "Her father passed away suddenly. He was my father's best friend. She had nowhere to go." "Enough excuses," Ruqayya interrupted sharply. "Tell her clearly that you married her out of pity. Promise me that you'll divorce her soon. Once she's out of your life, we can finally be together." Unknown to them, Hania stood quietly at the drawing room door, frozen in shock. She had come back to retrieve her forgotten phone, overhearing Ruqayya's bitter words. The mention of divorce sliced deeply into her heart, shaking her to the core. Her young heart suddenly ached terribly, confused by emotions she barely understood. Tears cascaded uncontrollably down her cheeks as she ran back to her room, devastated and frightened. She had begun, in her own innocent way, to feel something tender for Rayan, though she hardly understood these new emotions. Now her heart trembled at the harsh words she had overheard. Inside the drawing room, Rayan's patience snapped. "Get out, Ruqayya! You've crossed every possible line. Leave my house right now." Ruqayya stepped closer defiantly, refusing to back down. "Why should I leave? It's that little nuisance who needs to go. She doesn't belong here, you know it." "This is my home," Rayan growled, losing his temper. "If my mother had been home, imagine how embarrassing this scene would have been. Just leave." Finally, Ruqayya stormed out, slamming the door angrily behind her. Silence descended heavily over the room, pressing painfully against Rayan's chest. Moments later, alone and shaken, Rayan dropped onto the sofa, head spinning with guilt. He hadn't intended to hurt anyone, yet suddenly everyone around him was in pain. He covered his face with trembling hands, fearing the rumors that would soon consume his reputation at the university. His perfect, controlled life had unraveled completely. Meanwhile, Hania rushed to her new room, sobbing uncontrollably. Her heart pounded painfully, haunted by Ruqayya's vicious words. She didn't fully grasp the implications of everything said, but the threat of losing Rayan terrified her. Frantically, she dialed Shanzeh, crying uncontrollably into the phone as confusion and panic overwhelmed her. "Bajo, she mentioned divorce. Is Rayan really going to leave me? Why would he do this?" On the other side, Shanzeh sighed deeply, sensing the storm about to engulf them all. Outside, Rayan leaned back, eyes closed. He had no idea how his secret had leaked at university. But it had. Now his carefully built world was crumbling before his eyes, forcing him into a storm he had neither created nor desired. In a single haunting moment, he knew his life would never be the same. "Why didn't you just slap that girl across the face, Hania? If it were me, I would have destroyed her." Shanzeh shouted angrily through the phone, fuming over Ruqayya's interference. Her voice brimmed with anger and indignation, yet beneath it was genuine concern for her sister. "I don't know, Bajo," Hania whispered tearfully, clutching her phone tightly. Her heart ached bitterly, confusion swirling wildly within her. "I was so shocked, I couldn't even reply." Shanzeh softened her tone, sensing her sister's vulnerability. "Listen carefully, Hania. Tonight, dress yourself beautifully and go to Rayan's room. You must win his affection, his attention. Do you understand? This is your home now. You're his wife. You must fight for your place in his heart. Hania felt her pulse quicken nervously at her sister's advice. But Bajo, he clearly doesn't like me. Maybe we should just leave him alone. Don't be silly, Hania. He's your husband. If he moves away from you, you'll cry forever. Trust me, get dressed nicely, go to him tonight, and remind him of your importance, Shanzeh insisted firmly. Before Hania could protest further, Shanzeh had already hung up. Within moments, a driver arrived, handing her a neatly wrapped package. Curious yet hesitant, Hania slowly opened it. Inside was a stunningly elegant purple silk sari, embroidered intricately, clearly meant to highlight her beauty. Hania blushed deeply, her heart pounding in embarrassment at the very thought of wearing it. Almost instantly, she dialed Shanzeh back, panic creeping into her voice. Bajo, have you lost your mind? The sari. It's beautiful, but it's too revealing. How can I possibly wear this? Shanzeh responded impatiently, clearly determined. Stop overthinking, silly. It's just Rayan. You're his wife, for heaven's sake. He'll be mesmerized by your beauty. Trust me. As midnight approached, Hania finally mustered the courage to wear the sari. Standing before the mirror, she took in her reflection, her hands trembling. Her long black hair cascaded softly down to her waist, her large doe-like eyes accentuated by dark kajal. She barely recognized herself, transformed into a young woman brimming with shy beauty. Her innocence was highlighted even more sharply by the mature elegance of the sari. With her heart thudding erratically, she gently opened the door, peering into the silent corridor. The house was still, bathed in moonlight and shadows. Quietly, she tiptoed towards Rayan's room, each step fueling her anxiety and anticipation. Rayan's door was slightly ajar, inviting yet intimidating. Gently pushing it open, Hania slipped quietly inside. She found Rayan seated at his study desk, deeply engrossed in his notes. Uncertain how to announce herself, she carefully approached, her breath shallow, and quietly sat beside him. Rayan jolted upright at her presence, visibly startled. He turned abruptly, eyes widening in shock. His gaze lingered on her, stunned into silence. For a long, breathless moment, neither moved, as tension thickened between them. Breaking the silence, Hania spoke softly, her voice barely audible. Rayan, why did you separate our rooms? Do you dislike me so much? Her innocent eyes glistened, begging for reassurance. Rayan sighed, trying to regain control over his emotions. Hania, it's not like that. I'm just used to my own space. Yesterday, I couldn't sleep at all. It's better if we keep some distance between us for now. She leaned closer instinctively, her eyes filled with quiet desperation. But you could have slept next to me on the bed. Why did you choose to suffer on the sofa? Rayan quickly averted his eyes, heart racing uncomfortably. Enough, Hania. Don't ever speak like that again. Go back to your room, he snapped harshly, pushing her gently yet firmly out the door. And from now on, never enter my room without knocking. Closing the door, Rayan collapsed onto the bed, breathing deeply. His mind churned restlessly, overwhelmed by the complexity of emotions swirling inside him. What if his friends at the university discovered this secret marriage? His reputation would be shattered. Rukaya's furious confrontation still haunted him. Unfortunately, his fears materialized sooner than anticipated. The following morning, as Rayan arrived at the university, Rukaya cornered him aggressively, grabbing his collar in front of everyone. You got married, Rayan? Really? After lecturing me endlessly about prioritizing our futures, you suddenly marry a 14-year-old child? Her eyes burned fiercely with jealousy and hurt. Tell me, was your wedding night everything you dreamed it would be? Shut up, Rukaya, Rayan snapped, humiliated and angry. You've misunderstood everything. It wasn't by choice. Hania's father died suddenly. He was my father's closest friend. We had no option. But Rukaya's bitterness was unstoppable. So you're running a shelter home now, Rayan? Marrying every helpless girl who crosses your path? Take me too. I also need emotional support. Embarrassed, Rayan retreated, pleading silently for Rukaya to stop creating a scene. Somehow he managed to escape her tirade, hoping the day would pass quickly. However, when he returned home later that evening, shock seized him. Rukaya was already seated comfortably in his drawing room, casually sipping a drink, casting a cold glare towards Hania, whose eyes were red with tears. "What are you doing here, Ruqayya?" Rayan demanded angrily, entering swiftly. Ruqayya smiled sarcastically. "Just meeting your young wife. I simply told her you've kept me waiting for 2 years. And now you married her out of pity. Soon you'll divorce her anyway. Isn't that true, Rayan?" Rayan felt his rage boil. "Enough, Ruqayya. Get out now." But Ruqayya remained defiant, smirking mockingly. "Why should I leave? Throw her out. She's the unwanted guest here. Admit it, Rayan. You don't want this child bride. Divorce her, then we'll finally be together." Unknown to both, Hania stood frozen near the doorway, stunned and heartbroken by Ruqayya's words. Her innocent heart shattered painfully at the cruel threat of divorce, understanding its meaning well enough to feel terrified. Unable to bear more, she fled to her room, crying bitterly. Hours later, when Rayan sat alone, haunted by guilt and despair, Hania returned quietly, sitting next to him. Her soft voice broke his silence, surprising him again. "Rayan, please don't divorce me," she whispered tearfully. "I've started to feel something I don't fully understand, but I know I don't want to lose you." Rayan stared deeply into her pleading eyes, overwhelmed by emotions he dared not acknowledge. The barrier he'd built around his heart trembled dangerously as he realized for the first time he wasn't as immune to her innocence as he'd imagined, but the haunting thought lingered. Could he truly accept this marriage, this girl whose innocence had begun to unsettle him profoundly? "Rayan," Hania whispered softly, leaning her head gently against his shoulder. Her voice trembled with raw vulnerability, filled with emotions she barely understood, yet desperately wanted to express. "I'm your wife, and I want to stay by your side. I've fallen in love with you." Rayan's heart skipped a beat, caught off guard by the quiet sincerity of her confession. Without realizing it, his fingers moved instinctively, gently stroking through her silky black hair. Hearing her innocent confession brought an unexpected ache to his chest, softening the protective walls he'd so carefully built around himself. He hesitated, caught between desire and restraint. The fragrance of her perfume, a delicate floral scent, wrapped around him, intoxicating his senses. It weakened his resolve, leaving him dangerously vulnerable. His voice was almost a whisper, pleading softly with himself more than with her. "Hania, please go back to your room," he breathed gently, struggling to maintain control over his rapidly unraveling emotions. His resistance was fading rapidly, slipping from his grasp like grains of sand. Yet Hania stubbornly tightened her hold around his arm, pressing closer, her voice small and defiant. "I'm not leaving you. Why don't you understand? I can't sleep alone. I feel scared, Rayan. I keep thinking about Baba. He always protected me, and now you're supposed to protect me." Rayan felt his resolve fracture further. Slowly he lifted her chin, meeting her innocent, tear-filled eyes. Her vulnerability was irresistible. His hand reached up involuntarily, gently stroking her soft black hair. Despite himself, tenderness began to replace his caution, his emotions gradually overtaking reason. "Hania, listen to me," he whispered soothingly. "Right now, I'm working on my assignment. You also have school tomorrow. You should focus on your studies, okay?" But even as he spoke, his fingers continued gently caressing her hair, betraying his real feelings. He wanted her closer, not further away, despite his rational protests. Hania stubbornly tightened her hold, pressing herself even closer against him. "I won't leave, Rayan. Why don't you understand? I can't sleep alone. I'm scared. Don't push me away." "Stop this now, Hania," Rayan protested weakly, his voice faltering as her warmth melted his resistance. "Let me finish my assignment. And besides, you have school tomorrow." "I don't care," she whispered stubbornly, tightening her arms around him. "You're my husband. I'll stay right here." Rayan's heart beat uncontrollably as conflicting emotions overwhelmed him. He attempted once more to gently pull away, but when he saw the innocent pain in her eyes, his heart surrendered. "All right, Hania," he murmured, giving in softly, his voice filled with affection. "But don't blame me later if you get scared." Hania smiled timidly, confused yet hopeful. "I could never be afraid of you." Rayan's lips curved into a playful smile, deciding to challenge her childish bravado. Suddenly, he scooped her up effortlessly in his strong arms, holding her tightly against his chest. Hania gasped, startled, eyes widening in panic and excitement. "Let's see if you're really unafraid of me then," he teased softly, his voice filled with gentle mischief. Hania flushed deeply, heart pounding wildly. She had never expected Rayan to react this way. In his embrace, she felt secure yet deeply anxious, excitement battling nervousness. Gently placing her onto the soft mattress, Rayan gazed deeply into her eyes. His earlier hesitation disappeared entirely, replaced by intense longing. His restraint dissolved completely as he noticed Hania's timid, yet accepting gaze. If she was ready, willing, why was he fighting his feelings so stubbornly? Slowly, tenderly, he leaned closer, letting down the walls that had guarded his heart. Hania's eyes fluttered shut, her breathing uneven as Rayan's lips brushed gently against her forehead, then slowly traveled lower, igniting feelings she'd never experienced. "Rayan," she whispered shakily, opening her eyes, suddenly uncertain. "You won't divorce me, will you? Please never push me away again." Her vulnerable confession dissolved any lingering doubts Rayan had. He finally allowed himself to be guided by emotion, gently brushing away her tears. "Never, Hania," he whispered soothingly. "You're mine and I'll never let you go." His voice was a tender promise, wrapping around her fragile heart, easing away her fears. Hania clung tightly to him, trusting completely as Rayan carefully enveloped her in warmth and affection. He surrendered himself fully to the moment, letting their newfound bond transform their relationship. That night, the invisible barriers between them dissolved effortlessly. For the first time, Rayan allowed himself to openly express his feelings, holding Hania securely in his embrace, gently offering his love in a way she'd never known before. She surrendered entirely, overwhelmed by sensations and emotions she couldn't fully comprehend, yet trusted implicitly. Hours later, wrapped gently in his arms, Hania felt the deep comfort she'd desperately missed since losing her father. For the first time since her marriage, she felt genuinely safe, deeply loved, and truly valued. Rayan's gentle embrace conveyed the depth of his commitment more profoundly than any words ever could. As dawn approached, Rayan gently stroked Hania's hair, watching her sleep peacefully beside him. He'd initially viewed this relationship as an obligation, a forced responsibility imposed upon him by fate. But now his heart felt differently. He genuinely cared for her. Yet deep down, anxiety lingered, whispering questions he desperately tried to ignore. Would their bond withstand society's scrutiny, given their vast age difference? Could he really protect her innocence in the ruthless world outside? Closing his eyes, Rayan breathed deeply, embracing Hania tighter. He decided firmly at that moment, no matter what challenges lay ahead, he'd fiercely protect this fragile girl. Hania, still deeply asleep, snuggled closer, a small smile curving her lips in her dreams. For now, they both rested peacefully, oblivious to the storms brewing just beyond their fragile moment of happiness. The path ahead would undoubtedly be difficult, filled with trials neither could yet imagine. But tonight, in each other's arms, they felt complete, united by a bond born from necessity, yet nourished by growing affection. Outside their window, the first hints of dawn broke softly, gently illuminating their faces. Yet neither stirred, each lost in dreams, blissfully unaware of the shadows creeping closer, promising to test the strength of their newfound love in ways neither could foresee.